my name's Ark, and today I've got a little bit of a different video for you. Recently, my friend Maidvelia did a stream of a ton of useful tips for Mario Kart Wii. He goes over a lot of useful terminology as well as helpful visual demonstrations. Only one slight problem. It's 3 hours long. So this is my attempt at butchering this thing while still retaining all the useful information.
Everyone, I'm Maid. I've been playing this game for 9 years. There aren't a lot of helpful resources out there for driving optimally. I wanted to create this tutorial VOD to try to give people a better idea of what optimal play looks like. The first thing I'm going to be covering is driving fundamentals. I'm just going to cut to the chase. If you want to compete high level in this game, you have to use a bike. There's a really steep skill curve for karts as opposed to bikes, more specifically in-drift bikes. Here I'm going to demonstrate what not to do with an in-drift bike. You do not want to use your handling to make turns. You go really slow. Oh yes, don't use automatic. Use manual drift, use a top bike, and don't do what I'm doing. Do not turn with your handling. To turn in this game, you want to drift. As you can see, my speedometer is a lot bigger of a number when I'm drifting as opposed to when I'm just using handling. And it's constant. You are at a constant speed when you drift. When you're leaving a turn, after you've drifted through it, you want to release a mini turbo, and then you will go even faster. I went up to 101 right there. Now, to go even faster, because bikes have this really cool thing we call a wheelie, you want to mini turbo, then wheelie. Now, if you do what I just did there, that's not optimal. Mini turboing, then wheeling isn't optimal because you're still having to have your top speed climb up. But if you release your mini turbo and wheelie at the same time, you get to top wheelie speed. The gist of driving on this game is drift on every turn, release a mini turbo when exiting every turn, and wheelie at the same time you release your mini turbo. The faster that you release your drift into a mini turbo and the faster you wheelie after the mini turbo, the faster overall you will be. Because when you wheelie while in a mini turbo, you go even faster. That was 113 instead of 101. Now, this is provided that you have the ability to control your alignment very well. So you want to be able to have a good alignment for the next turn. Otherwise, if you release your mini turbo and wheelie very fast, but you have a poor alignment, you're just going to waste more time. Here's why. If you turn in your wheelie, you lose a lot of speed. Even if you tap, you still lose quite a bit of speed. Now I'm going to cover trick fundamentals. The tricks in this game honestly make the game a lot more deep and technical. So, generally, when you're approaching a ramp, it depends. What is the ramp going to do? What's its angle? Where are you going to land? All of these matter with how your landing is going to go. With a ramp that kind of just shoves you at the ground, you're pretty much guaranteed to not bounce, like this one coming up. The ground was literally just right there, and I didn't bounce. Now, upward slopes, you don't really bounce on those. Ramps where you have a flat plane, and the ramp is not flat, you tend to bounce. To demonstrate this, I will go to Crystal Dungeon. So here we have a ramp with an upward angle and a flat driving surface to land on. If I nosedive the whole way, I bounced a little bit. If you saw my bike kind of twitch there, some bounces are more pronounced than that, but when you bounce, your wheelie does not come out immediately and you lose speed. Oh, and if it wasn't clear, based on the driving fundamentals I told you earlier, where you want to wheelie after a mini turbo, the same goes for every other kind of boost. Trick boost, mushroom boost, wheeling is faster. Do it as often as you can. Now, if you're in a race with other people, wheelie bumps are a thing. So if you are in a congested pack, don't wheelie. That's about the only time you shouldn't be in a wheelie, is to avoid getting wheelie bumped. Every other time, you want to be in a wheelie. Okay, so that was a ramp bounce. How do you prevent or mitigate ramp bounces? You want to land on your back tire. If I go off this ramp and I angle my bike to land on my back tire, I have just stopped myself from bouncing and I went into an instant wheelie. The whole pattern of instant wheelies after a boost is pretty much consistent throughout most of the game. Now, the different types of tricks. More airtime is worse. You want to avoid getting more airtime unless there is a shortcut that requires a lot of airtime in order to make it. Up tricks generally have the least amount of airtime. Down tricks have the most amount of airtime. You can manipulate your airtime even further by tilting your control stick up or down while in midair to do either a nosedive or a tail dive, like I showed earlier, to control whether you bounce. Down tricks should generally be avoided, but they are the safest tricks to use if you want to land on your back tire. Two other tricks are side tricks, left and right. Side tricks are pretty useful for low tricking. Oh, another thing about down tricks is if you are on a zipper, those trickable areas on half pipes, and for whatever reason, landing in a wheelie will cause you to lose time. If I down trick this, I won't be in a wheelie, and I land without going really wide. Now I'm going to demonstrate another utility for side tricks. If you have a ramp and then a turn immediately after, you can do a side trick in the direction opposite the turn and sometimes go really tight. But if you side trick in the same direction as the turn, you're gonna go very wide. If I drift opposite, pretty tight. Now, if I drift and then go in the same direction, it should be wide. See how wide it is? So, if you do an opposite side trick to the direction of your turn, you will go tighter. There are other ways to go tighter on turns that are immediately after ramps, and that involves manipulating your airtime with nose dives and tail dives. Oh yeah, one other thing you can do to reduce your airtime is clip the sides of walls. It'll make your bike immediately start falling, and you don't really lose speed from it, as long as you don't clip for too long. So there I landed from a nosedive. Now here's what happens if I land from a tail dive. The result should be a tighter turn. It was slightly tighter. Fishtom Island is not the best example for this, honestly. But yeah, that's most of the trick basic fundamentals. There is a whole lot more to tricking than just what I had covered. That's why ramps in this game are so ridiculous. One thing I did not cover yet is how to get a proper rocket start. Why am I here? Did I choose the wrong track? I chose the wrong track. Let's go to the correct track. To get the proper startup boost, you want to do it when the first frame it starts to disappear, basically. So when you see that white, that's too early. The white is when it's full. Each number flashes. So a little bit after that, and you will get the full startup boost. Now I'm going to cover the fun stuff. We're going to take a step back and get away from tricks for a bit, and I'm going to cover the different types of drifts. Now this is going to get pretty in-depth, so pay attention. The first thing every new player should learn when it comes to drifting is how the different drift angles work. You want to have the proper alignment right off the bat, and then you'll go into the next turn, and then the turn after that will be fine. There's a few different drifts in this game in terms of what angle they provide. You have delayed drifting, sharp drifting, which is your normal drift, and you have soft drifting. You also have spin drifting, so that's like a fourth angle. So most new players like to drift like this. They just go complete full turn on their control stick. Okay, this turn should demonstrate it. So yeah, I'm kind of poorly aligned here. So without getting too complicated, a sharp drift gives you a poor turn radius for going into another turn, unless the turn is super sharp like a hairpin. But here I am delayed drifting. You see how much better the alignment is? It's because delayed drifts give you just a much better turning radius to go into another turn. There's a lot of benefits to doing it, and it should be done at basically all times, unless it's like a hairpin. Delayed drifting is probably the #1 thing all new players should learn how to do when it comes to drift technique. Now, I'm going to cover briefly, I'll get back to it, soft drifting. Soft drifting is a little bit similar. It's a shallower drift, but it's not so shallow to the point where your mini turbo buildup is slow. It's at the point where the game is still registering your mini turbo buildup as if you're doing a full drift, but your angle is not sharp at all. This can be done in a couple different ways. You can have your control stick almost more than halfway pressed. This is how Luke does his soft drifting. You can also just put the control stick in a diagonal corner of your controller, and you will do soft drifting that way. Soft drifting has a different angle than delayed drifting, and you don't want to do it on every single turn. Tracks where you need to get mini turbos out very frequently, and tracks where turns are almost straightaways. If you want to get a mini turbo on a very short straightaway kind of turn, soft drifting is the way to go. It really depends. Soft drifting is not mandatory, it's situational. Delayed drifting is mandatory. So I will go back to soft drifting in a little bit with how it relates to other technique. First, let's cover slip drifting. Slip drifting is when your bike either gets airtime or micro bounces. Point is, airtime. That's it, okay? Airtime. So when your bike gets air... Okay, that was weird. Let's try this again. When your bike gets air, and you land into a drift, that's it. You're just landing into a drift from any pocket of airtime. Some are micro bounces, like right before the Dry Ruins wall glitch is a good example of a micro bounce slip drift. It's a fairly simple concept. When your bike gets air, you just land into a drift. But yeah, that's the basic concept of slip drifting. This whole concept of an air pocket mitigating the need to hop to get another drift is used in chain drifting. Chain drifting is another type of slip drifting where you chain mini turbos together. Back to the concept of, okay, see that mini air pocket, and then I just started just immediately drifting to the left there. There you go, slip drift example right there. This micro bounce or air pocket concept allows you to chain mini turbos, and this is called chain drifting. Chain drifting is probably the second most important technique to learn in this game. I'm not even joking. It is the best way to be really fast. There are a lot of turns that require more than one mini turbo. If you hold one mini turbo on that turn, you will be very slow because you're only going up to 113 once, when what you could be doing instead is going to 101 multiple times. There are two chain drifts in the game. The same direction chain drift and the opposite direction chain drift. When my bike is only jamming itself to the right, I'm doing a chain drift. Anyways, that same direction chain drifts, shallow turns, like the ones on Mario Circuit 3, use soft drifting and chain drifting. Let's cover the opposite chain drift. The opposite chain drift kinda looks like a bike's version of snaking. You want to use this on S-bends. The opposite chain drift is a lot easier to tell when you've done it successfully. You just know immediately when you fail it because you see that hop. The GCN Mario Circuit S-bend before or in the tunnel is the best example of where to use this. Here's another good example of where to use it. I'm gonna go to GBA Bowser Castle 4, and there's a neat area to use the drift that I covered. There's one example of an opposite chain drift, and here's another. Turns that are kind of like Z's instead of S's work just the same way. Well, almost the same way. It's kind of similar. Now, before I cover spin drifting, I am going to cover wheelie chain drifting. Now, wheelie chain drifting is not required at all unless you want a world record. Actually, it's not even required at all to get a world record. It is one of the coolest techniques, but it is also one of the most minuscule time saves in the entire game. It saves you less than 1 millisecond to be doing a wheelie chain drift versus one without a wheelie in between. For me, because I don't claw and I use GameCube controller, I don't wheelie chain drift. A successful wheelie chain drift will give you 1 more kilometer for a less than a frame. That is how minuscule of a time save this is. Actually, I think it's exactly 1 frame, not less than a frame. It's just 1 frame. Did you see my character kind of jut upward or down? That's him trying to do a wheelie, but instead he's doing a chain drift. There, I did it again. So this is accomplished by hitting up on the D-pad and the drift button at the exact same time. It is very difficult to do this if you don't claw. So that was a slower version of a wheelie chain drift where you get a tiny bit of a wheelie and then it goes into the next drift, but it doesn't really flawlessly chain. You can also do wheelie chain drifts in the opposite direction. Okay, I did one. Okay, there's one. See how my bike kind of jutted upward before changing direction. That is the chain drift. Practice it, get good at it. It will make you very fast. Next, I will cover spin drifting. So the spin drift is probably one of the cooler techniques in the game, and people obsess over it more than they should, but it doesn't have that many uses. It's kind of like this motion. You hit the drift button, immediately turn in where you want to go, then immediately go opposite to where you want to go, and then back to where you want to go. Very fast. And it causes your character to do a weird motion where their butt kind of goes out in the opposite direction and then back in, like this. So here's what you can do with a spin drift. If you have a really sharp turn and you're at a really bad angle, or you're using a vehicle that can just not drift, you can use a spin drift to save yourself. Let me find a narrow track to demonstrate this. So here, let's pretend I have a pretty bad alignment. I'm going into the turn kind of like this, right? Instead of going wide like that, I can use a spin drift. And then I go much tighter. Ghost Valley tracks have these walls, and on some turns you may want to avoid them. Because your character like jumps out a little bit, you don't hit the wall, and you also take the turn tighter. It's kind of like that. It'd be better if I showed it off on Ghost Valley 2, but I don't have that slot open. Spin drifts also give your bike more airtime. Some shortcuts absolutely require you to do a spin drift hop to go as far as you need to go. Other times the spin drift makes shortcuts easier, like the Mushroom Gorge gap jump. Now, we're going to cover briefly, I call it weight drifting. The weight drift is similar to a slip drift. You hit a micro pocket of air. You're not chaining drifts because you're only getting one mini turbo. Your bike is going in 2 different directions with 1 hop. I will demonstrate this. You land. So what I did was I drifted a little bit to the left, and then about a half second after my bike touched the ground, I hit the drift button again and drifted to the right. And I call that a weight drift. The last drift technique I'm going to cover is the TAS turbo. And the TAS turbo is where you do an opposite chain drift and then immediately wheelie. I didn't do it properly because in TAS what they do is they wheelie about the same frame as the second drift comes out. It's crazy. What this does, it can give you a better alignment, and it's just faster for certain turns. It's used a lot on Bowser's Castle 3 in Tool Assist. One thing I want to emphasize about the opposite chain drift, I'm getting a little bit off topic for the TAS turbo, but you can use the opposite chain drift if you need to realign yourself when exiting a turn. Either it's because there's an item in your way, someone bumped you out of your line or something. If you want to readjust yourself, you can literally just do that. A lot of good players do this. Anyway, the TAS turbo, it looks cool. It's very hard to do. What I'm showing you isn't, okay, that was better, but what I'm showing you isn't actually how to do it. Because as soon as I hit R, I should also be hitting the D-pad, but I'm not. That's about as close as I can get. But yeah, that is the TAS turbo.
Okay, I'm gonna cut it here. Be sure to come by next time for part 2 of this Mario Kart Wii crash course. Hosted, of course, by my friend Andy. If only there was a way to get notified of when that video will come out. Nope, don't think there is. Anyway, happy racing.